Morning.
Morning. How are you?
Okay.
Hello,
Yeah.
Amanda.
Good morning. How are you guys?
How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm all right. I'm glad to be back in the saddle for this Saturday morning stuff.
Good.
But and we'll get into it more later. But it's been even just a few things that have happened this week from Future Futures too. I had a Joe Pro. I guess I'm just calling them Joe Pro meetings. And then we had the brain organoid meeting on Friday, and there's more good about it. So there's just been a lot of stuff, and I did some. If I didn't have a meeting last night, but I did a hefty amount of administrative cross hat administrative work for myself and for various projects, um, in and outside of the lab. So I feel kind of glad for that. Um,
Yeah.
But I'm also, in need of my own caffeine this morning. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're getting back into the swing of the year. So, yeah, this year we'll be having our meetings. We've already had a Cognition Futures meeting this year. That was Wednesday. We had a administrative meeting on Friday, which was about brain organoids with Morgan and Jesse. And then we're going to have the cybernetics meeting Thursdays, every other Thursday, I guess. Will start soon. Diva Worm starts Monday. So we got all those on tap for the year, starting for the year. And so, let's see. Jesse put the Notion in the chat, link to the Notion. We have, let's see, the Jamboard. Yeah, he also has a Jamboard link. I don't know what that's all about. But
It was just a general Jamboard link because it's like your drive link, so it's not anything specific. Yeah, I basically would lead to the discussion of potential alternatives because I guess Jamboard is going to be deprecated or like or something like that.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah. Jamboard is really convenient in the context of putting things in a folder and using, having everything archived. But yeah, there are other options out there. This isn't going to happen until the end of the year, so we have some time. But yeah, just something again to think about. And so yeah, I look forward to a good year of activity. So hello, Morgan. How are you?
Good morning.
Morning. All right. So we have. Why don't we start? If people want to give updates as to what they did over the time we were not having meetings. I was sick. I think the last one I wanted to have was the 16th of December, and I got sick that morning, so I couldn't do it. And so then we took the break off, the holidays, and here we are. So we haven't been around in about a month. So yeah, there's a lot. Maybe people did things over the holiday or want to talk about what they want to do for 2024 or whatever. So, oh boo!
You're feeling better. I didn't mean to hit the wrong emoji sound effect, but yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll go last.
Okay.
I did see. I won't. No spoilers. I did see though that there was some interesting uploads to the Oral YouTube account.
Oh yeah, I'll talk about that later. Yeah.
Teaser.
Yeah. So who wants to go first with their update?
Sure.
Morgan.
Yeah. Good holiday. I also got sick though for Christmas. And I'm still still a little phlegmy. But let's see. Well, definitely excited about 2024 in terms of organoids and kind of molecular biology, synthetic biology in general, because there's been a couple more meetings at the Biopunk Society here, which is the community biolab in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting group of biotech startup people. And this week, or this coming week, is JPM Health, which is a big conference, a big kind of finance of life sciences conference. But there's going to be some interesting meetings and kind of not workshops, but I would call them presentations that are going to be this week. And well, I don't know. I can post it in events or something, but there's going to be some kind of not neurotech. What would you call them? Well, let's call them neurotech. Neurotech people from University of Pennsylvania doing a presentation on Monday or Tuesday. It should be really interesting in terms of the kind of I'm blanking on the company's name, but it's like Michael Canna, Brian Litt, kind of BCI stuff. Michael Canna, I think the computational memory lab guy at UPenn. I'll look this stuff up before and yeah, I'll put in some links. But anyway, some interesting people going to be presenting. And of course, I'm going to try and use it as an opportunity to track down the cerebral organoid companies that I know exist in either San Francisco or South San Francisco, which is kind of the big biotech area, and see if I can get more details about what people are doing, especially what they're doing at scale. And there's Sergio Pasca has a new, I think I dropped a link in this, new perspective article out. That's the head of the Stanford cerebral organoid group, and runs brainorganogenesis.org. Sure. Yeah. I mean, certainly San Diego, sorry, just reading Jess's comment. San Diego is perhaps the powerhouse of molecular biology, life sciences, and I did drop a link. I've told people this in terms of because again, like Biopunk Society people, for the most part, are again involved in some business aspect of molecular biology, which is a lot of drug discovery, obviously, but not only. One woman has a company focused on viral, kind of viral risk assessment, which I thought was, would be also kind of interesting to think about. But a really interesting talk from, again, I'll check the name, but a real veteran of neurological drug discovery that gave a talk at UCTV. He's down in San Diego. He's working for companies. He's describing, like in his talk, it was just interesting, the asides about the mergers of drug companies. just while all he's trying to do is explain his work, but he's just like, well, I don't work with any of those people because we've been bought out and by this big company, and then they just merged with that company, and but it was really interesting in terms of what he said, how he used assembloids as opposed to organoids, and and basically the drug discovery pipeline as opposed to the kind of um, research culture. So he explicitly distinguished his work from Alison Motry's in terms of, we don't need to do that. We can do this, and we do this because we also need to do 100,000 of these kind of things. So that was really interesting, in terms of not only the references but also the kind of the off the shelf tools that he could use for, again, assembloids are still a rather sophisticated culture. So I think there's still a lot to learn, and yeah, very, very exciting. But there's also, I think I described this a little bit yesterday, but big news in neuroimaging, in the sense that Open Water Health had big announcement this week. This is Mary Lou Jepson's company. This is the woman who was involved with the one laptop per child program back in the day, if anybody remembers that.
Yeah.
And anyway, she's got really interesting technical background, and we've been waiting for this announcement for a long time. Wasn't sure it was going to come, but not only a big round of financing, but open sourced hardware and software. As I pointed out to people, you can open source your hardware and software. Becoming a medical device company is still a big, a lot of work, actually, a lot of additional work. And that's what the 50 million is for. So, but it really be interesting. And we got this conference coming up where Kernel's presenting. That's the company that's bankrolled by Brent Johnson, with really interesting near infrared headset.
Okay.
So Ryan Fields is the CEO of that, and they'll be presenting along with Mary Lou Jepson, both at JPM Health and then this upcoming Photonics West conference that is called, well, there's a subset of it called BIOS for biological optical imaging. So those are the kind of short-term things. There's, I was still dropping the stuff in Slack over the holidays, so it like do go through. You can there's some good stuff in there, and yeah, hopefully we'll check some of those later.
Yeah, we will. So I have one question. So in the DevaWorm group, we've been talking about organoid stuff and kind of getting sort of a typology fixed in our heads of the different techniques. So what's your sort of definition of an assembloid versus an organoid?
Well, I think it relates to the kind of the heterogeneity of the cellular differentiation. Would that will that get me off the hook?
I guess, yeah.
Without looking it up.
So the assembloids have greater heterogeneity.
Yeah. I think so. Or like again, like also, I wonder if it speaks to the like again, I'm gonna go look this up. I did apply for a free poster.
Okay, yeah.
And it basically it has like spheroids, assembloids, organoids.
Okay, yeah.
Was gonna, yeah, I forget who that, like Stem Cell or Thermo Fisher or something.
Okay.
but again, just back to, like, what is the organoid, right? Like, again, it's artificial. It's not a brain, or it's not a thing necessarily.
Right.
It's your artificial attempt to reach a kind of tissue endpoint, right? as best you can. So, um, but anyway, that's my off the top of my head answer.
Yeah.
But I think those are great questions, and I wonder if we would get different answers from different people.
Probably, yeah. I think so.
like where is the field, and and I'm super curious too, about, um, are we at the point? I mean, it's really nice that, we have talked about the BIPOC Society's, um, grant work and what they've been trying to do in this informal STEM education resource, but, uh, I'm looking at it as an opportunity to at least try and go out and get this kind of material, like educational material for, what are the protocols? Can we have a wiki that has the protocols for, spheroids, assembloids, even better, because over the holidays, Levin had a new paper on, these human cell. It's this kind of the robot, living robot work,
Yeah.
and again, like, he seems very open with his protocols, but I don't know where I would necessarily go look up what's the definition of an assembly, but
Yeah.
I bet
Yeah.
I would definitely start with like Sergio Pasco's paper, and and then obviously you have to add to that the different kind of protocols that we do have. One of them is chimera, right? Which
Right.
is, you take the organoid and implant it in a host animal, because that was, Sergio Pasca's, next step to, um, increase the kind of the um, I mean, to reduce the artificiality,
Right.
and give it some sense of vasculature and kind of signaling that, would be more natural.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway,
Yeah. So yeah, I guess
I'll look it up while we're talking.
yeah, good. I mean, my take on it would be that the assembloids are just kind of like these. You're building an assemblage of cells, and you don't really care what you get different endpoints, and you get something that maybe functions like a set of tissues or a tissue, whereas maybe an organoid, you're selecting cells of a certain type, so you have like maybe better analogs of tissues. I mean, this is like what you do with stem cell biology, where you select the cells that are sort of going in a certain direction, and you culture them
Yes.
over and over. And it's
Yes.
just basically what are the cells in the tissue? What is the composition of
Yes.
that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too to think about. So I got a good line. There's a student, again, through Neurotech X, but a student interested in the organoid work, and, well, some other work too. And she's currently doing a project with Danny Bassett, which I thought was cool. But the microfluidics. She was asking about microfluidics. I put a link to a workshop from, I think it's the Center for, it was like physics and molecular biology. I forget what but really interesting work in terms of the, organ on a chip, and and it's interesting there, where it's like, I mean, just thinking about what you said, Bradley, about, the assemblates, like, organ on a chip definitely has a very, very artificial, I don't know, yeah, maybe you call it assembly, but like, Like it's a group of cells.
Right.
It's like a group of cells in this well, a group of cells in that well. They're connected via these pathways, and you're making an incredibly artificial or seemingly artificial platform. At the same time, you're still capable of doing some really interesting work with these, and it seems to be its own, really its own discipline. And anyway, uh, Huh, Huh, I believe. Huh has, again, I posted a link talking about his, this is a University of Pennsylvania microfluidics researcher, and this his octopus platform, which has nothing to do with octopuses, but is, I think, just relates to the fact that on these organ chips, you have like multiple arms
Yeah.
of pathways. Anyway, but really, it opens up the definition of, because like making an organ that does have multiple tissues, you can potentially do that on a chip and use that to do science, like, which is again, interesting.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Morgan, for the update. And we'll get into the Slack channel in a little bit. Looks like Sushmanth has joined us. Hello, Sushmanth.
Hi, Bradley.
Hi, how are
Sorry
you?
for-
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello. Yeah.
I
you're
haven't
here.
Happy
been
New
on
Year.
it since last 2 months.
Okay.
I have been got into a full-time role for a company after GSOC.
Really?
Good.
I
Congratulations.
hope you know Cisco, right? You know Cisco, the networking company.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got into that company as a software engineer role. GSOC helped me a lot. I couldn't manage those meetings and this. That's the reason I couldn't attend meetings. But from now on, I just want to attend meetings and start the work which I have left incomplete.
Okay.
Is that okay, Bradley? I
Oh,
mean, I
yeah.
will just. I'm not. Uh, I will try to mentor this GSOC and I will try to work on the project which I have left. And I will complete it by writing the paper which I meant to be.
Oh, yeah. That sounds great. And congratulations on your position. And yeah, nice to see that you're finding some success. And yeah, I mean, you can do this at your own speed. We do have some things that we need to kind of put, the papers in that. But I know, we can just keep working on that as you have time. And,
I got pretty messed up with the company meetings and these, and I couldn't get any chance to talk with you also because I think it's been 2 months I haven't even messaged you. That is the reason I thought I would join a meeting and explain the whole situation.
that's fine.
Yeah, after January 10th, I will be like completely. At least I will get some break to engage these meetings and all. So I will join every weekly meeting and I will give you an update.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah.
And another thing, belated Happy New Year and
Oh, Happy New
Christmas.
Year.
I can wish you.
Yeah.
Those are my updates, Bradley. And one thing, GSOC mentoring and the whole GSOC helped me a lot in my interviews. It actually kind me helping me to communicate with the interviewer, and yeah, I have landed in a pretty good job with a pretty salary. I haven't mentioned you this thing, and thanks, man. I will come. I will start working on the papers, etc. from after January 10th, and I will keep you updated.
Well, that sounds great. Thanks. Yeah. Good to hear from you again. And
Yeah.
good to hear that you're finding some success and that the internship was, good, helped you in your career. So it's good.
Thanks. And I was working in deep learning only in Cisco also, working some networking noise removal in the networks by using deep learning. It's completely research type of job only. Yeah, that's it, really.
Great. Thanks for the update.
Yeah, it's really great to hear what happens because sometimes we hear stuff, sometimes we don't hear anything. So it's always nice to know what's up and definitely at your own pace if you want to do other things. But we're really glad that it helped you get like a tangible benefit, and that's like that's kind of the ultimate goal of like Google Summer Code anyway. And well, not necessarily, but a pretty big one. Like if you can benefit from it and you get something that can help you do other things, that's amazing. So yeah,
Actually, it helping me to communicate with the people, and I'm very kind of introvert at starting. This also helping me to communicate, and I have learned so many technical things in the whole process.
yeah.
And for the by God's grace, I don't know, the interviewer, whoever it is, he asked me the same questions exactly, which I have worked during GSOC. And I was like, wow, I have been working on this thing. Especially there is a parallel GPU thing
Hmm.
which we write code in Slack. And it was same question he asked in the interview. Like, could you explain about this thing? How it helped? How you know about this? And I was well able to communicate and give the answers. And got pretty went well. I have not only Cisco, I got into Microsoft also, but I rejected the Microsoft and I've been working in Cisco. And yeah, in meantime, I will work badly, and as promised, I will write the papers which I have meant to be, and I'll let you know updates by every weekend. Monday meetings of Devolan.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. All right, that's great. So who else wants to go with an update?
I didn't really do much over the break, which was nice.
Yeah.
It was very restful. But I'm looking forward to our meeting starting up again. Wednesday was good. I felt like that was a good, I don't know, just collection of our thoughts for the future. And then for the next cybernetics reading group, one thing we could do is pick one of the papers on that screenshot, one of Levin's papers. I could find it in the Slack again, but he was giving a
It's
talk.
like the diverse intelligence papers.
Yeah. He was like, this is really, there's a lot to say about this, but that's not the purpose of this talk, but here's where to go for where I have talked about it. And that was what that screenshot was. So, and I think any of those papers could be a good thing to read. And yeah, we could start that this coming week on Thursday.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep, that sounds great, Amanda. Thank you. Yeah, looking forward to the cybernetics meetings. Just kind of like developing what we did last year. So last year we talked about Norbert Weiner's work, and then we talked about Mike Levin sort of at the end of the year, and some other things as well. And so bringing that together, with maybe another reading and kind of doing some synthesis there, I think is going to be valuable for the kind of maybe understanding cybernetics in a modern light, or the people have written a lot of. I've seen papers out there where people have tried to like pick up the torch, and some of it is not. A lot of it has been theoretical. A lot of it has been kind of like, we're developing a cybernetic approach to X or something, and so it's nice to have a good theoretical synthesis to sort of reevaluate what we call cybernetics and where it's been and how we can kind of pick up the torch. And we talked about that, I think, in the cognition futures group meetings, correct? About like how we want to do the cybernetics aspect of what we're doing.
Yeah, and I mean, this one of the things I'm working on that's currently under the guise of like the Manifestor project is basically what I think we're doing in cognition futures and in now with cybernetics, um, in a really fun way. Like I think one of like I don't know if it's really a hidden agenda of the lab or just the current form of some things, but we are looking at like theory and theoretical innovations in a way like we're a small group of people that are talking about ideas, but at the same time there's so much more like just explicitly on the table in some of the discussions that I find it to be really interesting. So yes, we're doing that about cybernetics. There's an implicit link to, like I call it like the logiciel stuff, which is sort of like mathematics broadly, and how do you combine certain math and theory and formalization efforts, which I think was sort of the allusion just now to what we talked about. We'll get into more a bit later, but part of, I mean, if anybody watched, I appreciate. I'm embarrassed sometimes at the condition futures meeting because some of it is just so raw, and I'm very not articulate in them at times, maybe even most of the time. But we found some footing in the meeting eventually, mostly thanks to other people, like putting it together, perhaps. But um, we figured out how we want to talk. Well, not figured out, but made some really nice articulation about what it is we want to do in some of these spaces, in some of the cognitive science, in some of the condition related things we're talking about. Like, how do we want to, what's sort of the evaluatory lens we want to use as we go through the methods project and incorporate what we've been learning. So it's really cool. I don't really know how to talk about this. Maybe I should write. Maybe this is something to. I put on the whiteboard here and get the marker ready. But like I think that's like it would be great to write a little piece on RL and it's sort of, I don't think hidden agenda is not a fair way, but it's like the way things are theoretic, like the way we can like have some very legitimate discussions at a theoretical level across different fields is really really appealing, and it's I think on a slightly personal note, what I've talked about before is sort of like the manifesto project is sort of a macro view of across different fields. I don't want to attribute to anybody rightly or wrongly other than myself right now. So it's like my take on where in many different fields things should go, not exclusively mine, but for the sake of where it is right now. Articulating those things and where they should go and maybe where they could go, or why they didn't go in certain places. And I mean, there's a lot of dovetails into the whole, frontier map essence and that sense of discerning some navigational possibilities and why and why not philosophy, history of science, and all that stuff too. Um, so yes, more about that ahead. But I mean, I'm kind of dovetailing into my update in this too. Um, so, is there anything else you wanted to say, Amanda? Otherwise, I'll just keep trucking, I guess.
Nope, go ahead.
Yeah. So that's kind of excuse me. I covered quite a bit of stuff that was on my list. Some of the things to say now, and I have a decent list. I'll share my screen soon for other stuff. Um, I have a list of like some social media related updates, like call for involvement stuff, and then the board. To go through that at some point. I don't know. If you have other things you want to talk about first, probably that's great. But my just quick updates are there's a bunch of social media posts and call for involvement things I do want to mention. We had Cognition Futures. I basically mentioned it. We spent a good amount of time just kind of collecting some of the pieces that were scattered on the ground and putting some order. And we reviewed sort of what would a position paper look like, or what would our kind of oh, here it is. I'm pulling up here. Kind of a little bit of a comparison to how things were a year ago. We were talking at that time about sort of a lot of specifically about method stuff. We talked about prescriptive glossary, a descriptive glossary, and sort of the different sub projects that were prescriptive, descriptive, and evaluatory. And we kind of looked at then versus now a little bit. Ahead, I'm going to dive more. Next meeting, I'm going to dive more explicitly into that to go over sort of the paper pyramid. We made a little bit of clarification about our evaluatory lenses we want to use, including mutually informed constraint. Talked about formalization and some things like that. So that was a really nice discussion kind of coming from the ashes of, the end of the year. We had a really good brain organized talk, which we mentioned already a bit. Might talk more about. I also had I don't really know what to call it, but I had a Joe Pro related meeting about some specific projects, and mostly with Jen, who is kind of a part of the lab, but a part of maybe Joe Pro more so. She worked with us at NICWIC last year on some things. I don't know if we're going to reprise that this year. NICWIC is also happening, by the way. Associations are open until I think a couple more weeks later in January. So that is an event that we can submit to or be present at or sponsor even. So if you want to sponsor or volunteer or whatever, there's options. But the meeting about Joe Pro was Jen and myself and some projects there are going to take a look at the DSM, which is a big manual in psychiatry and diagnosing mental illnesses, mental health, and so on and so forth. There's a few things we're going to look at, but one of them is just like starting very basically right now, like the history of it, how it came about. It kind of started in the 50s or much earlier. There's been a few major revisions, a couple half revisions. Where and why, just getting our feet wet with that, because it's something that there's sort of some mutual interest in, and as these things that are kind of shaping a lot of stuff, I'm not extremely familiar with it myself. It's kind of come up in the periphery. I did a little bit of work in, I did a little bit of very simple work on a simple like machine learning and sort of diagnosis classification issue related to autism in some of my coursework. That was very, very, very simple, but getting used to these sort of, it was part of the data set at the time was about, trying to get some general machine learning classification that could help with advances at the time in DSM updates. So just seeing interesting connections there kind of sparked a few things, and there's something ahead there that I'll talk more about in the future. I mentioned the quote unquote manifestor project. There's sort of the awkwardly named person studies project, which I have some actual alternate names coming up in terms of like something like I've been used like ChatGPT to help brainstorm. One of them was something about like human experience redefined, or these things that we're kind of getting at, looking at and redefining that's a lot of the bigger theoretical stuff about what is happening inside someone and how to classify and labeling that. That's one thing. And the last two, like just quick bullet point updates are for my own self, looking ahead. I have an interesting opportunity to really get a little bit more involved in maybe data science related to biology and interpreting bio data, and we and I have a little bit of experience with that so far. Like I've done it with Neuromatch, I think so a little bit of things in Devo worm, but I'm not extremely familiar with that. And there's sort of some inertia here already with everything Morgan's talking about, things that Amanda's looking at. But just like I find myself seeing a really nice pathway for me to focus on more this year. So I'm kind of looking forward to merging what I'm learning in data science to really diving into hopefully more like neurodata and other kinds of the bio stuff, which I haven't done a whole lot of. I've kind of been on the periphery of that with DORM for a long time. So we'll see. I'm still going with the master's program. There's some things that like online at MIT I'm curious about. And there's also a lot of stuff at I have to give a little shout out to my alma mater at University of Albany, because they for a group of for a university that has such a Well, probably they all do. I mean, I don't know how to really say this, so I'll just be sort of diplomatic about it. For a group of colleges and departments that has restructured in unique and interesting ways over time, the I was an informatics graduate, and and the way informatics and their housing department, which there's a lot of things sort of related to security, and that stuff. They have some very interesting AI based stuff. Like one of them is one second, just really quickly. They have a really interesting partnership with NVIDIA and their cloud program in supercomputing, which is like quite interesting and like part of the AI Plus initiative, which is about more about data center and cloud platforms and stuff like that. But like legitimately, it's pretty cool that they've gone down that path. And I'm happy alumni of the university, and I'm trying to keep up in touch with them and do what I can there. But this, I talk a lot about stuff with other universities, but like shout out to them for really pushing some things forward, and I'm curious what they're doing. There's a whole like different focus on AI coming out from like the more applied security or information related sense there, and I'm quite curious what they're going to do with that. So that's cool. But yeah, outside of that, as I said a bit earlier, it's been a lot of. I feel like this week has been a major boon to just my administrative kind of sanity and going back into the metaphorical and literal, I guess, but metaphorical office. Like a bunch of papers and things scattered everywhere, and notes and like sticky notes and stuff on the floor all the place. It was like, okay, now I familiarize myself with the different piles of stuff and their relative inertias. So I feel a little more ready to do what needs to be done. And also, like, there's really interesting work to be done with the brain organized stuff that we talked about on Friday. There's interesting stuff to be done in Christian Futures, interesting stuff to be done on the cybernetics reading group, which is sort of, immediate for us here. But there's also a bunch of other stuff in the lab that I don't know if we'll talk about today or not, but is quite exciting. I should also mention we've been reached out to by UAlbany again. I should put this to them because we had a positive situation with other people when like Brian Corkle and others from that sort of group and cohort were part of the capstone course. They reached out to us again. Looks like soliciting if we want to participate in as being a group that students could partner with or be a sponsor for their efforts again. So that's a good sign. I mean, if it were really bad, I think they would have, said, hey, let's not use them again. So at the very least, it's sort of a, hey, you did something pretty okay. So that was cool. I don't know if you want to say more about that, Bradley, but you mentioned the email thing. Like, yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for the update. And, there are a lot of things you brought up there. First is I think it's really interesting that you're looking at the DSM. I don't have it up, but there was a question in the Slack that I think Jesse asked over the break. He asked Morgan this question. So it was like, does computational psychiatry, how do they interact with the DSM? Mm-hmm. And yeah. I don't know what the answer. I mean, there's a long answer, I'm sure.
Yeah, let's revisit.
Yeah. So I mean, but I think that's interesting what you and Jen are doing, Jesse, with the kind of coming up with some maybe how you could classify things. And I know it's been revised, and it's a tool, but it's an imperfect tool, and so I think that'd be a really interesting set of questions, especially also around how a lot of computational psychiatry is kind of interacting with that.
Yeah, like it's it's kind of it's such a like when you say DSM, like it's such a there's such a gravity to what it can mean or does mean or in a de facto way that it is. And like I really don't know anything about it other than like some of the major changes that happened from between like 4 and 5 or 3 and 4. Like those things. Like I know like a handful of those things. I don't know anything about it. But it's sort of this thing that's a major reference point, and I'm quite curious, like, what its history? What was its contentions? What was its critique? What were the lobbyists trying to do for this and that? And what were the major reasons for the changes, and so on? And how has it changed with the times? Like, some things were described mental illnesses that are clearly not mental illnesses anymore, or now not very openly not seen as mental illnesses, and some things have become more so that way. That's quite cool. And also, Jen volunteered, like, comparing to some other things, like, I forget what it is at this moment, but like, I think it's maybe the ICD or some other international describer and descriptor of conditions in medical senses. And just like, it's quite interesting to do. Like, I don't, we're not experts in that area, but, and I don't propose us to be, um, the goal of the mission isn't to we're not going to rewrite the DSM, but we want to have a healthier grounding in it because some of the things we want to talk on later and investigate will be related to that. And Jen has substantial background in aspects of healthcare, and um, we will, just as a little bit of more reminder too. We were originally considering, actually, Jen was considering doing a DEI ethics board kind of a project as an association with the Tech Ethics Board. We decided to table that for a variety of reasons last year, but it was a potential pathway to go down. And this one has a lot of interesting things. I mean, some basic. It would primarily be a basic. Like, I'm encouraging her to. We have like some deliverables set out to be like kind of a basic blog post deliverable, or eventually a presentation. But kind of the standard start with some small blog posts. First one will just be about generic history and getting used to writing about that. So kind of standard building up stuff. But I'm really excited about it because I think it's something that I feel like I really should be more knowledgeable about because I'm kind of dancing around it so much in all these other topics. And then, yes, exactly as you said, how does it fit with like computational psychiatry? What are some efforts? I worked very briefly on a tangentially related topic earlier a few months ago for a short amount of time, but I'm curious what else is in that space, and how does you know what are the perils and benefits of using machine learning and computational stuff to help classify in a better way those things. So we'll see. Um, that's the wrap for now.
All right.
Let me just drop a quick book recommendation though. Mind Hunters is I think a really nice overview of the history of psychiatry, and because psychiatry hasn't had there's still no real understanding of the causes of disorders and things like that. how many decades we went through where medical practice was really kind of witchcraft. And it's really important to know the history, to know kind of what certain psychiatrists were responding to during that decade in terms of what they were proposing, and then you eventually you get into the decades that cover the rise of the DSM, the rise and the fall, right? And and it's definitely important for people to know that that there's been a real I think it was like 2013 or something, but there was a real change in NIMH in terms of at least funding and the need to discuss DSM has greatly diminished. But ICDs and things like that are still, that's international, and there's still labels for disorders. Doctors need to need categories and things like that. So those still there.
What you said, is it like the Mindhunters in like the FBI book, or is it a different book? I was just looking to see like inside.
It's definitely different. I'll find the reference.
Oh.
Yeah. No, it's not the FBI one. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've seen it, but it's a woman author. I'll track it down.
Okay, sure, thanks.
That's a good TV show. Am I confusing it with the TV show? I don't. I want to say it's called Mindhunters too.
Okay.
But I'll track it down for you.
Okay.
Yeah, not the behavioral. What's it? What's that FBI group? It's like the behavioral something.
Profiling, maybe.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Also, like, hey, hi, Rochelle. I want to give you space to talk. We're just doing general updates and stuff. If you want to say or type anything, glad that you stopped by.
Yeah, welcome, Rochelle. Yeah, Happy New Year to you too. I hope you're doing well as well, Rochelle. You can type an update in the chat. But yeah, I think we're having a good conversation here about this, especially in light of the computational psychiatry focus that we're doing in the Slack, and we've had some discussions on that, and then some of the things that we want to get out of that. Of course, Jesse's work with human studies and that. So that I think there might be a good point of interest there. Let's keep down that path. So I'm going to give my update, and then if Rochelle wants to put something in the chat, she can put something in the chat. We'll come back to it. But I have a couple things to share with people. That's Jesse put a link in the chat on this book. Yeah, DSM History, Psychiatry's Bible.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's called Mind Fixers.
Oh, Mind Fixers. Okay. Not Mind Hunters. Because fixing is different.
So what you're saying, if you're a fixer or a hunter.
Yeah, so fixing is different than hunting, I guess. All right, so let me share my screen here. I'll give an update on some things that I'm kind of getting into here. So, as Jesse mentioned, there have been some interesting uploads to the YouTube channel, and I actually made a blog post on this on the Medium. So we have this new post. This is a new YouTube playlist that we have for the lab, and this is called Topical Deep Dives and Syntheses. So I'm going to have, and anyone's welcome to do this, we have this channel called Topical Deep Dive. So basically, it's stuff that we don't want to necessarily go into in the meetings, or don't have time to go into in the meetings, but it's on just reflections on ideas, kind of pulling ideas together, sometimes very disparate ideas. And the goal isn't to have a really refined synthesis like you might expect in a paper or even in a focused conference talk, but just you don't need to ramble, but it gives you space to kind of bring ideas together, or at least at a very cursory level. So I tried not to ramble in this, and this is a good example, a good template of what we want to do for this. So this is a series of talks. I did this. This is a slide deck I've been working on. I think I mentioned it a couple times in the Cognition Futures group. So if you remember some of the things we were doing on thermodynamic entropy and information theory and all of that, and then we talked about Maxwell's demon for a while, and I took kind of those ideas and I pulled them together, And I did this like a really long slide deck. It's like 2.5 hours of content, but I broke it up into 4 parts. So it will spare you kind of that whole spectrum of things at once. The first one is, of course, sort of motivating everything. A deep dive into Maxwell's Demon. And so let me pull up the image here. This is a shot of the playlist. The first one is an hour long, but it goes into Maxwell's Demon. It goes into cybernetics. It goes into information theory, thermodynamics, etc. The second one is sort of a follow up to that. It's about 30 minutes long. The rest of them are 30 minutes long. The third one gets into some sensory motor laws and loops and embedded information processing. And then the fourth one is kind of bringing everything together with some concepts that we've done in the lab. So it's kind of like bringing things from the lab specific things with some of the history of ideas and maybe some theoretical synthesis. And so this is like a new concept. I want to see if we can develop some of these in the new year. Kind of this space again where, it's in between like polished presentations, but also a little bit more than just rambling on, and kind of getting into a deep dive mode where we kind of explore a set of topics. And then, the hope is to go back to this and say, okay, what are the themes here? Can we extract themes? And then let's pull those out and maybe use those as the grist for papers or talks or whatever. So, the idea here is to encourage interdisciplinarity, but to do that, sometimes you have to kind of put yourself out there and pull together ideas and bring them to, not necessarily a polished head, but just kind of like maybe a set of action items or a set of connections that you either discover in the talk or you discover it by going back over the talk. So there are 4 videos in this channel, and maybe we'll do another round of this, in a couple months. And you don't need to be like this complete. This is like a 2.5 hour set of videos, but you can just do like a 30-minute thing. Just come up with some slides and, some topics that you're interested in and kind of go for it. But those are on the YouTube channel, so check those out. Another thing I want to talk about is revisiting some of our work on Gibsonian information. So we had our paper that we did for I think it was the BICA conference back in 2021, and that got published in their conference proceedings. And I've noticed that people have been looking at that, using various metrics on ResearchGate and things like that. But so I decided, we have other stuff that we've kind of talked about. So I've been working on this primer for Gibsonian information. And it's actually pretty long at this point. It's, let's see, the word count is 14,000 words. It kind of goes into maybe more of the evolutionary or the ecological psychology and the ecological perspective and how that fits in to this idea of ecological information and Gibsonian information. Proposes new measures that go beyond what we proposed in the original conference paper. So there's some equations there and some concepts being laid out. And then, giving some examples of how to use this. And then, of course, it's drawing from our other discussions on some of the things that people use in ecological psychology, like this parameter tau, which we talked about in the Cognition Futures group. And I also want to add a section on resonance, but I haven't done that yet. So I put this in the Slack, I think in the information theory channel in the Slack. So if we go to the Slack, we go to the information theory channel. There should be, I kind of put this up right before the holiday. It's right here. And so, if you want to look that over, if you're interested in contributing to this, let me know. We can talk about it. I'll probably change I could add authors in here. It's fine. But, definitely this is something I want to get out this year as like kind of a preprint or maybe publish it somewhere, but I'm not quite sure where that's going to go yet. But the idea is to have this very large primer on this so that people can go to it and reference it. And, it's more complete than a conference paper. It kind of really lays some ideas out. And then, we can draw back from that paper, on things that we want to sort of use for other studies. So it really kind of goes through a lot of things in here, a lot of examples of how to apply it, a lot of models, things that, we might explore in the future, and dynamical systems as well. So there are a lot of things there to kind of talk about and follow up on. The third thing I wanted to talk about is getting back into these VR discussions we've been having, and I know Vershali's here. She kind of timed it perfectly. So there's a lot going on in that space. The first thing I wanted to talk about, it's interesting, is if you are interested in developing for the Oculus or the Meta Quest platform, there's a new tool out called Haptic Studio. And Haptic Studio is, so, people have tried to incorporate haptic technology or sort of the feeling of touch into VR for a long time. And, it's hard to do because you need to have some sort of physical feedback. So it could be like a controller, or it could be like introducing feedback in the headset, or it could be wearing there are some systems that are very expensive where you wear like a jacket that's instrumented with feedback sensors where it delivers some pulse, a vibration to the chest. And so it gives you this sense, or, there's like maybe some uh, hydraulic system where you get air pressure that inflates a set of balloons in a vest that gives you pressure back to your chest or something. There are different ways you can deliver haptic feedback, and it has to be synchronized with the thing that you're developing, the sort of the virtual stimulus that you're developing. So it's very hard to synchronize it and to make it work well and to make it work somewhat cheaply, because you don't want to pay like $10,000 for an interface that doesn't work very well. So Meta's developed this Haptic Studio software. So this is something that you can use. You have to use a headset with it, but you can also develop different types of haptic stimuli in this application. So this is for all the Quest models. You can deliver, different types of stimuli to the Quest controllers. So if you know anything about the Quest, they have these two controllers, and you can develop, or you can send the signals that you're developing in the software to the controllers. So basically what it is you're delivering sensory feedback through audio files. Okay, can you see the Haptic Studio?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So this is an example of the software. I'm not connected to my headset, but I could be. And you can interactively develop on it. So there are all these projects, and so what you basically have is, so this is a sense of touch. And so we have a number of different clips here. And these are audio clips, so they're like WAV files. So you have these signals that can be processed, but they also have a lot of information in them. They have gain information, or the amplitude of the signal, the resolution of the signal, which is also included in the amplitude. So as the signal goes up, it's, there are these properties that you can set, and it changes the nature of it. You can hear it. So let me see if I can play it. If I can play this sound. It's not letting me play it unless I'm connected. But basically, there's going to be like a car engine. It's going to start up, and it's going to rev. And this is the sort of the audio spectrum of that signal. And so you can modify the signal as you want. So you get like a recording from the world, from maybe your virtual environment. You put it in this platform. You modify the waveform of the sound, and then you deliver that to the controller as a vibration. So any sound is a vibration. If you've ever put your finger on like a headphone speaker, or a very large speaker, standing speaker. You put your finger on it or your hand on it, and you can see the vibration coming off of the speaker. And it's because the sound waves are, have this vibrate. It's vibrating against a membrane, and that's how it generates the sound. And so it basically delivers this to the controller, and the controller vibrates, but the vibration is linked to the sound. So you hear the sound, you feel the vibration like you would in the physical world, but it's all simulated. So this is ice in a glass. You can play this, it sounds like ice clinking in a glass. And again, you can develop this in different ways. You can look at the waveform, modify the waveform, and you can deliver it to this controller. So the idea is that, you can, set up a project. You can have different types of recordings, audio recordings, and then incorporate that into the design of your VR app. So that's something that, it just came out in, I think, December. So it's something we can explore if we're interested in doing that. It would definitely, I think it's a nice little platform for kind of developing the technology that they have. It's pretty rudimentary in the sense that, it's like just basically what people have been doing video games for many years. They'll control, like, maybe like if you're doing a driving simulation and you have a controller, they might have like deliver some rumble feedback where you feel the road. And it's very simple, but it adds to the experience. And so, with this development, dual shock controller, in this environment, you can do a lot of things with different sounds. And then there's a means to deliver it pretty easily and cheaply to the person using it. And again, they have other types of very expensive ways to do haptic feedback, but those are harder to actually do technically, and they cost a lot to actually implement. So
it's interesting. It reminds me to get in touch with people at NeuroSensory.
okay.
It's like that's David Eagleman's company that made a haptic. So he made that vest. He made a haptic vest, and I think got a TED talk about using that for people with hearing issues to be able to train themselves to hear.
Yeah.
But with this, kind of augmentation device. And so it's coming through their skin, but by varying the types of kind of rumblers that you're using,
right,
and using like a large patch, like a large area, that you're able to encode a lot of different or a lot of dimensions of the sound, and that just in the same way that old German, like 1950s, where he uses prisms to invert the world, and then like wears them for enough time that like his visual system inverts the world. People could train themselves to, in a sense, hear with their skin.
Yeah.
And it's really, really interesting. I jumped on their Slack though, and the Slack looks dead, and it makes me wonder about the company. But Meta should pick up their tech.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for improvement in the haptics world. We do need to have like a development platform, but I mean there are different ways you can do this. You can have like gloves. People have been developing gloves for years that are still very expensive, but they deliver sensory feedback at the fingertips and in the hand. And of course, that's an area where you have a very dense distribution of proprioceptors and things like that. You can also deliver feedback to the face or the head. That's where we have a lot of sensory receptors as well. And then, being able to pattern that feedback so that it means something, because you don't just want to like slap someone, the equivalent of slapping someone. That's not like useful. So that, that's something we can follow up on in the future. Oh, there we have a glove. Yeah, I think it's a haptic glove that Jesse put in the. Yeah.
Well, yes, I think that's like the Nintendo Power Glove from. I never used it, but it was like kind of this.
Hmm.
I don't know
Yeah,
if it had any haptic feedback at all, but it was like a.
it's got oh, I forget what the electronic component is, but it's in the cyber glove. So as you move, it causes a little electronic thing to stretch, and so it's capturing your digits or your interdigitation, or
Yeah, your
it,
digital movement or something.
yeah. So it's able to capture this, this part.
Yeah.
And there's a device called Cyber Glove that I think was more like the 90s.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I think.
that was definitely designed as a like a HCI research device, and I say I've got one. It's my storage unit.
Oh, okay.
I can pull it out of the storage unit.
Would it work?
But yeah, it's a pretty solid device. Like it's
Yeah.
a pretty yeah. I think it would, but it probably has it probably uses like a serial connector,
Okay.
like a DB9.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
connector. Like I need to find some USB converter.
Yeah. Okay.
It wouldn't be complete without breaking the new year with one of our favorite gifts, which is this the entire everything. Having to the true purpose of all these power gloves is just to
Yeah,
hack every computer and
hack the planet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Then I wanted
Okay.
to talk about one last thing with respect to that. So we also last year discussed a little bit about non-Euclidean virtual environments, and that's a very broad term that just means something that isn't like the normal physics or the normal geometry of a virtual world. So there's this game. This is also for the Meta Quest platform, and this is something called Hyperbolica. And there are a number of different applications that kind of use this sort of non-Euclidean approach. But Hyperbolica is a game that you can like view the world map as this hyperbolic space. And so hyperbolic spaces are interesting because they're not Euclidean. Right? So if you're in a Euclidean world, which we are, you can look at sort of your horizon out in the distance, and all the points kind of converge. All the lines sort of converge to a point. So if you look down a road down towards the horizon, the lines converge to a point. And a lot of buildings or objects have perspectives that are sort of you know three-dimensional. What those things look like. In hyperbolic worlds, the projection is on this hyperbolic space, and it's sort of this curved negative curvature space. So it's not like Euclidean spaces, um, or even like another like some of the spaces they use in physics, like Minkowski spaces and things like that. It's quite different, and the consequences of that, of course, are things look very weird in um, in this hyperbolic space. So there are different hyperbolic sort of transformations you can make to a Euclidean space, and there are different ones that they use in the physics community, like de Sitter spaces and things like that. They're just basically reference spaces, coordinate spaces, like we have a Euclidean coordinate system, but they have a curvature to them, and if you interact with things in that world, things look very weird. This is an example of hyperbolic objects where they have this negative curvature. If you want to go to like two lines making a point, they don't actually make a point in the way you expect it. There's a curvature of both lines, so it's like you kind of come like you're moving towards a corner, and you kind of curve into the corner, and then it's very disorienting is the point. So you have all these objects that are in this hyperbolic space, according to this hyperbolic map. And so this is a press kit for this game called Hyperbolica. Is released in 2022. These are some screenshots. This is a farm in hyperbolic space. And this is where you have this curvature of the barn. So instead of having a clear perspective, like front to back, you have this front of the barn, and then the back is like this huge deformation of the back end. And you have these other objects that are likewise. And so it's just really, you imagine you're an avatar and you're walking through the space, and you know how to navigate the real world, and kind of the cues, but also kind of the way that you expect your environmental surroundings to unfold. Well, that's not what you get here. You get a very different experience, and you get a very different sort of set of navigational cues. And the thing I'm interested in with this is, like, how do what is the performance in terms of spatial cognition? What do we actually build this kind of map? Do we know how to navigate this well, or can we learn to navigate this well? Can we learn, can we pick up on cues? Do we have to build a whole new spatial representation for this? Or can we adopt our normal sort of Euclidean or, positive curvature set of representations that we have to a world like this? And I think it's a very interesting set of questions. I'm not sure what the answer is there. I mean, I'm just kind of exploring what people are doing with this. It's very interesting, but I think there's some opportunities here to sort of connect with some really interesting research questions. So we have these non-Euclidean spaces, or these non-Euclidean types of worlds that we can build, and then we can experiment with them to see how people interact, and maybe answer some research questions with that as well. So, like I said, I talked about this and if Shali was in the meeting where we talked about non-Euclidean virtual worlds, but I just kind of gave a 5-minute thing on it, and I wanted people to know I was still thinking about it, but I don't know how we express that. That's the game Hyperbolic is just one example. There are other games, and there's a whole, they use the term non-Euclidean in the development community for VR, but that just means anything that isn't like the normal physics or the normal geometry. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do that is, you can break down that category into other things. So but I don't think people really kind of thought about it too much in that kind of research way. So there's a lot there to explore. Okay, so let's go to the chat here. We had, Jesse had the meme here, the Bart Simpson meme and DualShock controller. Rishali said, interesting. That was to the stuff on the haptics. Yeah. So, yeah. Any comments before we move on?
I just added something about, we talk about perception and affordances in the environment, and it's sort of like gives some information and like direct perception. How does that change in a game world like that? And then I went a little bit further, saying it's really interesting because I'm going down a rabbit hole, and I don't really want to spend a lot more time on this, but just to voice it, try to be very brief about it, which I'll fail at, I'm sure, is it'll be interesting to fluidly or see in a virtual environment how you can do sort of geometrically but also temporally. And I thought, well, it's weird because in a game environment, you kind of inherently have a different sense of time, in that time is optional. Like even just classic save scumming to get through a game, which is like, for those who aren't gamers, like the idea of a save state and the idea of quick load or quick save or quick loading to get through a situation or a difficult part of the game. You can press the button and retry, sometimes pretty much instantly, depending on how fast your things load in your computer or whatever's running. you could be instantaneously unreloading this. In the older games or bigger games, it takes longer, but both in the sense of just a button that can reset time and find the path you want to go down on, and then the rapidity of it as well. And so it's like, well, you can kind of already do some time manipulation. So I thought, what would be different than just different paths, or even like a lot of like art role playing games have like telltale games, and they're, oh, this person's gonna remember this, and very obvious cues. This is a path you could have gone down narratively. So it's interesting. Like I haven't really thought that way as like game worlds already as sort of these different different time like parsers or selectors, or offering a control in that space. But I thought, what would the hyperbolica and spaces like that, and in the perception sense, is there a way to kind of play around with time in that sense? I have no idea. It's just a space that I'm curious to check out. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. So the people have done that with like time, but it's a matter of like kind of figuring out how to implement it. Like you can like think about like the different elements, but you also have to make it something that people can understand. Like, um, yeah. So there's actually a game called Super Hot VR. I don't have a set of images for it, but it's also something where you can stop time. So is when you move your controllers, the action's going, and then you stop moving, and the action freezes, and it's like you have to kind of adjust. You can control time in that way, but it's like the way they do it is there's one way to do it in terms of controlling time, but there are a lot of other ways to do it, and a lot more interesting ways of like kind of controlling the flow of time, maybe relative to your perspective or something else. Yeah.
One thing that I do, I know this is a little bit tangential, but like that I think is really interesting, and I'd be really curious if we'll ever come across papers about this. So the majority, not everything, and it depends on what kind of game you're playing. I think it's mostly subject to kind of classic adventure and role playing game. Because if you're in a strategy or in a competitive game, people are coming to get you. Like things are happening regardless of your agency and choice, right? So I know there's exceptions about that, or in fighting or sports game, but I think there's a very interesting kind of conditioning of the user in a lot of the games, mainly the games that I play, frankly, where that unless you move your party or your character forward on the map, nothing is going to necessarily come at you or come around it. And then there's a lot of like, I think of like a classic Bethesda role playing game, or Skyrim, or even to an extent like Cyberpunk, the one I talked about recently, or Baldur's Gate 3. These sort of things where you're very intentionally not being you dictate everything by the choice of your movement, with some exceptions. And there's a lot of like people say, oh, there's mods that make that changes and have things come at you. Yes, but I feel like there's a very interesting thing. I think there's I I think it's a really interesting space to think about this sort of conditioning of agency, of plot, and any kind of plot development or action dependent on the selection of it, and whether or not the game is portrayed as basically real time or unfolding, or if it's inherently turn based, and how that affects um, stuff. Because I think what a wild thing to do, or things that kind of come to my mind thinking about these things, would be like, what if you have like this both happening at once? Like you have some things that are inherently time oriented and some things that aren't. And again, this is actually why I go back to, I haven't watched a lot of it lately, but the concept of D&D and like Critical Role in these games are really fascinating from a cognitive level, because oftentimes, or sometimes in a very exciting way, there will be both happening at once in the D&D universe. Because the DM, the game manager, the dungeon master, whatever, might set a timer, or just have an overt like like real time happening that the party knows about, or one in the background. And then when that time happens, whatever is going on just gets disrupted, and these sort of real time, non-real time thing, and even like the concept of time and audience in the D&D world, and like who is talking to whom and how much time does that take and actions per turn is a really interesting thing. So I feel like one of the things I'm curious about with VR in this sense is I think there's a lot of interesting research questions, rightly said, that might be um, fixed there, and also sort of like agency related or dependent or contingent takes on time and development. So
Yeah.
lots of ideas there, but we can move on. So, cease.
Yeah, there's a meeting. There's going to be a game. I don't know how to describe this meeting, but certainly it seems like looking at games as these massively these massive populations of social dynamics that you have at least on the bigger platforms, and I certainly think that's interesting. From the plasticity standpoint, like the hyperbolica, or like the ability to to really manipulate people's perception, is really interesting, and but that's why I brought up neosensory, because like again you can do I liked what neosensory was doing, which was like cross modality plasticity, like making sound into touch, and then thinking about if you did that, yeah, neosensory. David Eagleman's the uh, the lead. I don't know if he was technically the CEO, but maybe. But he had a CTO. I'm blanking on his name. That I think was a postdoc. Had been a postdoc in his lab, and but really interesting. Really interesting questions. That would be like easy to do, or certainly easy to do with their tech, in terms of if I start transducing sound into touch, and then in a hearing person, right, and then and actually remove the hearing, so that then they only get the touch, is that now being routed through your hearing brain area? Like how would your yeah? There's kind of multiple areas in which the plasticity would be interesting to track.
Yeah.
And we talked. I met with so like the community manager for neosensory, Jenny something, who was because she was based in New Zealand. It was interesting. Like her morning was our evening,
Yeah.
I think, but she was in tomorrow. Like
Right.
anyway, yeah. And so she would join us for Neurotech Hack Night, and yeah, it would be great to link back and see what's going on with that tech and things like that. But really interesting question. I mean, really interesting work that could be done. If nothing else, like I know some researchers who work on touch and had always made their own devices, and it was like I was just like, well, this is such a nice stimulation device for that. Like, if nothing else, we should be selling this to researchers.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've made some, but they were all like sort of homebrewed, and it's hard to have like a good.
Right.
Yeah.
And so hey, Teresa.
Hi.
Yeah, like let me try and follow up with Jenny. I want to say it's like an S, but I'll find, and we can see about that. Teresa, sorry, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Yeah. Teresa's joined from UPenn, and we've been talking both organoids as well as network control theory.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I'm Teresa. I'm currently a sophomore at Penn, studying a bunch of stuff across neuroscience/bioengineering with some math and analytic philosophy. And I'm currently doing research in Dr. Bass's lab on structural connectivity using metrics from graph theory. But recently, I've been becoming increasingly more interested in using network control theory approaches. And simultaneously, I'm also working on a speech decoding project for which I'm applying TDA which is short for topological data analysis for signal processing, or an eventual potential neuroprosthesis application. And I'm pretty interested in the intersection of computational neuroscience research with some sort of translational applications, be they in the medical realm or anything else that has utility, really. And with that in mind, I spoke with Morgan like 2 weeks ago, about the prospect of somehow combining brain organoid modeling with the control theory approaches that some members of Danny's lab have been using. And yeah, I'm currently in the brainstorming stage, trying to familiarize myself with all of those areas of research and see where some future trajectories may lead.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Really cool. Yeah, well, as I've said to Teresa, like I'm still not sure about the network control theory, but it was interesting to get into that and have a look at some of the Bassett Lab papers. And I don't know if Bradley, if you have any thoughts on that, but I'll share a paper that is interesting. I wonder. So this is a Regulome paper on organoids that's talking about like gene regulatory networks, and I was wondering about network control theory as applied to gene regulatory networks.
Yeah.
And whether again, like I haven't done that kind of gene regulatory network analysis.
Yeah.
But do the concepts of energy not make sense in that context? But they still must have some, there must be some parallels. Anyway,
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely a topic worth discussing more.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if people have done that. I mean, there may be some papers on that, but no, it's definitely something that can be done. I mean, it's just a matter of how to do. I know people have done it with like in connectomes, in C. elegans connectomes, for example, and things like that. And really, all you need is information about each node. So you need to know kind of like which nodes are controlling what other nodes, or what parts of the network are controlling other parts of the network. And with gene regulatory networks, you're just setting up like a set of genes that are interacting. And some genes, of course, and we know that like there are a lot of circuits, especially in differentiation, where there's like a small number of genes that sort of control a lot of other genes in their activity. So, we kind of have like a little bit of knowledge of that, not a lot, but it's something that we can then model if from the data as we get data. So what kinds of cascades are being set up, so what sorts of genes are changing as differentiation is occurring, and then what other genes are being changed and other things like that. Like I said, I don't know what the state of the art of the literature is. It's probably worth looking into, because I'm sure people, and not just in organoids, but like out in the world of like cellular differentiation, stem cell biology, etc. Because
that's and certainly bringing some sort of Bassett-like approach to organoid work, it would be a goal.
Yeah.
Like,
May I ask, because I'm slightly confused by the configuration of, I guess, this whole thing. Like, what is the specific focus of this group, or where are you coming from? Because I just hopped on the link, but I don't actually know
Oh.
where I am right now.
sure.
You want me to tell her?
Sure,
So
Bradley.
yeah, this is our general meeting. So our group is really interested in a lot of things. We go from like biology, developmental biology, computational biology, do things with organoids, to like cognitive science, where we're talking about like computational psychology and or psychiatry and cognitive science and things like that. So this meeting is like to have a lot of those topics covered. We talk about things in our Slack. We do research on these areas, and so we're constant. And we also do some things with complex systems. So we're constantly moving between things, and so I think definitely there's what we're talking about now fits into what we're doing, but we'll have some other conversations about other things, and so we kind of bring all those things together in one pot. So, um, I mean, do you want to add anything else, Morgan, is specific to
No.
organoids? Or...
I too am sometimes, hard pressed to say exactly what exactly is but multidisciplinary, and I like multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, welcome, Teresa.
Yeah. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So, and we were just talking about some well, like one particular software project, but that was using VR, but to alter kind of the perception for non-Euclidean space, and haptics, adding haptics to VR setup. Yeah.
So returning to that a little bit, and then I want to actually get into the Slack stuff, which I mean, we can go over that quickly. But Jesse had mentioned where we were talking about like kind of freezing time or selectively controlling time in a video game or in an environment, virtual environment like that. And so I think that has, if we return to our sensory motor loop, and we've talked about that in the Cognition Futures reading group, where we have the sensory motor loop, where we have feedback, closed loop feedback between the environment, between things going on in the world, and then the sensory response to that. So we get sensory information coming in, we process it, we give a response, a behavioral response, and then there's that closed loop feedback. But it's actually interesting that kind of breaks that apart in a way, because if you stop the action, then you stop your feedback. So you can continue to respond, but it's not going to be in that world, and it's not going to be reflected in the action. So we think about like these feedback loop, closed loop feedback loops. We kind of take that as an article of faith a lot of times when we talk about perception and action. But if we have a mechanism that breaks that loop, then we can actually maybe look at like how, if I break that loop, say, and I continue to behave, and then I return to my environment, what happens? Do you get desynchronized? Are you able, does it break your adaptation to that sort of world? What happens? So I don't know the answer. I mean, I've been kind of interested in that for a very long time, but it's hard to do without the right technology. So like with virtual worlds, it's really hard to correctly kind of control the flow of things, the flow of action. And you can put things like, like say like you had a racing simulation and you were driving your car down a track, and then you stopped the game and you got up and you maybe got a drink of water or something, and then you came back to it. And then that's kind of a superficial example where you're breaking that loop temporarily or coming back to it, and then you're picking up where you left off. So you lose maybe some information there about what was going on, but you can jump back into the context, and that's not a huge problem. But if you were to say introduce selective breaks in the action, say like you were I don't know what maybe like doing a running simulation or walking simulation, and the simulation just stopped at random, it halted at different points. And sometimes technology, because we get this latency in some of our simulations, that happens, by default, and then we say it's it breaks our immersiveness or something like that. So that's
Yeah.
a problem. But I mean, doing this in a way that is like actually probing the sensory motor loop and doing it in a way that we can actually look at those breaks. That's the kind of thing that maybe we that might yield some very interesting data. And yeah,
There's a lot there. Like kind of what I was getting at towards the end previously was, I think like the most jarring thing that comes out of that is sort of both the transparency of it. Like if you know, as the user in that space, if you know you are basically linked or coupled to the real, quote unquote, but the real flow of time, or if you can have the agency and the power and the control to say, no, I'm pausing the game and everything's going to stop here, or just the flow of interactions, and how transparent that is versus, do you have the ability to, do you know that you can stop it? Do you know that you can stop it? Are you unsure if you can stop it? Is there things you can perceive or consequences in the game or whatever environment where even if you do pause, things change? Like, are there variations in that? And I feel like that we were talking originally about just like Euclidean and non-Euclidean space and navigating that space and that in the physical sense. And I wonder, you know, I think there's some interesting things to tease out in terms of agency or like perception of I don't know how to say it, like agential affordances for what your role in that environment is, and sort of manipulating or navigating it as well. But and there's a lot more to say about that. I know we have.
Yeah, I like the group that works on something that sounds like this, Bradley. That can you induce the sense of falling? And what breaks that? So um, but definitely getting to the point where you can induce that sense of falling. That's what they would consider like you're immersed, and then you can see that.
Oh, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think like when you break your concentration, like if you're concentrating on something, if you're talking and then you say, I forgot what I was going to say next. That's a good example of that. That's not virtual. So like, and we don't really understand how that works. So like if I'm talking and I say, oh, I forgot what I was going to say next. It's because I was immersed in that train of thought and then it got broken somehow. And then I can return to it maybe later, maybe not. But how does that happen? What is that loop? And how do I get back into it? Yeah. So you don't necessarily need virtual environments for that. But one thing virtual environments allow you to do is to kind of measure it. So we can actually digitize it and then say, okay, at this time point, we had this break. And then we can look at maybe a physiological response or like some sort of, indicator of the person's mental state at that time and say, okay, this is where the break occurred. And then this is where they kind of lost track of their mental state or they kind of got sidetracked and they forgot what they were going to say. And maybe it's a breakdown of working memory. Maybe it's a breakdown of some other thing that we can measure, and really kind of, then draw out a graph where we have, environmental break or environmental stability and that versus like, working memory break or something like that. And so this is, that side of the goal, because we can say, oh yeah, we can sort of say this anecdotally, but when we talk about a sensory motor loop, we're talking about two things we can measure. And then like one thing contributes to the other thing. Maybe we're summing that experience, and it's becoming cumulative in the individual, and they're responding to the cumulative experience of the environment, and they're doing it in a way that's easy to sort of interact with the environment very cleanly. If you say lose a bunch of information as you're interacting with your environment, then you can't really interact with the environment cleanly, and you kind of maybe can't make decisions or can't act on things. Or so a few words about the closed loop nature of the sensory motor loop. So our sensory motor loop is roughly something like this, where we have the environment here, and this is the external world. And we have sensation, which is this pathway to the internal model of the agent. It could be a computational agent or a human agent or an animal. And then the motor output. So briefly, the environment provides information in the form of a sensory stimulus to the individual. It gets processed in an internal model, which produces a motor output to the environment. So this is closed loop, meaning that it's very tightly integrated. And even though it's tightly integrated, and you think that's a good thing from a continuous information processing perspective, it's actually not, because it's very fragile. And what I mean by fragile is that if the sensory signal is broken, selectively or unintentionally, that can result in a break in this loop. So let's consider a break in the loop. So if we have a break in our loop, again, we have our environment, we have our internal model, we have our sensory input, and we have our motor output. So if we break the sensory input, and let's just break it like this, and it could be, again, in time. We could break our sense of temporal continuity. We could break our sense of perceptual continuity in terms of like what we expect to see. So if we're in one of our non-Euclidean environments, if we encounter some perspective that looks weird or we're not moving in the way we expect, we can break this sensory flow. And so the sensory flow is continuous. I mean, in the closed loop system, it's continuous. And it has some sort of consistency. So we should expect, like previous time points acquired by the internal model, to be consistent with future time points. So, we kind of have this Bayesian likelihood of the next step. So in time, we have this sort of integration over time. So we have an integration over time. And of course, we have an integration between sensory modalities as well, which we won't get into, although our paper was featured in the meeting on the primer for Gibsonian information. That will have examples of that as well, so stay tuned for that. But when we break this sensory motor loop, we break this closed loop system, we break the continuity, we break the consistency, and often this break is sort of a break in the consistency. So it has an effect on the internal model. That integration over time is disrupted. Okay, so now what are the consequences for the motor output? Well, when we break the sensory input, we can have a continuous motor output. It's not a problem necessarily. We can continue this motor output, and what we end up with is this open loop system, which is like if we sample enough of the environment and the environment is stable, then we're static, then if we've got enough information, then we can have a no motor output that's sufficient. So I'll give an example of if I go to a museum and I see a picture of the Mona Lisa, and I look at it enough times to get all the detail down. I don't need to have the Mona Lisa in front of me to produce a replica of the Mona Lisa. I can simply observe it enough times, integrate that information, and then when that sensory input is disrupted by removing the stimulus, I can still reproduce that stimulus with the motor output, no problem. That's an open loop system. So this is our Mona Lisa example. And I'll just use that as an example of like painting from memory. And this, I think you can intuit this because people do a lot of things from memory. I'm doing this lecture from memory. So, sometimes you get disrupted. Sometimes you lose your train of thought. You misremember details. And this happens oftentimes in painting where you merge details or you misremember details and you end up with things that are not exact replicas. Oftentimes that's very common in like reproductions. But anyways, now we have a closed open loop system that functions sort of like the closed loop system. There are no problems with reproduction, and that's what we're interested in here, is because we have, that's kind of our goal. That was our goal all along. When we had the closed loop system, we were just basically reproducing action in this sensory space. So we were reproducing what we thought of as what the space is and what our response to it is. So we're sort of modeling the space here in our internal model, and then we're responding in kind, and it keeps it sort of this isomorphic mapping between the environment and the internal model. And so as long as we have that isomorphism, everything registers, our motor output is what we might call appropriate. So we have an appropriate motor output. And I'll just put this here. So we have an appropriate motor output for the sensory input. Now, we have this open loop system. Sometimes it's sufficient for doing what we want to do, which is reproduction of the environmental state or response to it. So we could say it's reproduction, it's an isomorphic response, or a response to an isomorphic mapping. And that's good for keeping that loop contained. And so that loop is important in things like presence, immersion, things like that. So let me draw this once more. And this time I'm going to draw this as sort of a selectively disrupted loop. So there's something to be said about like a combination of like a closed loop system and an open loop system. So we're going to say it's a closed open loop hybrid. And that hybrid is going to be, it could be adaptive. So you could have the system closed at certain points in time and open in certain points in time. And that would allow for, faithful reproduction of the environmental state, this reproduction, but also improvisation, meaning that I don't want an exact replica. I want to be able to adapt my movements. Sometimes if you have a closed loop system, you run the risk of sort of just copying everything and not learning anything or not having any variety. And so this closed aspect can lead to necessary variety, but sometimes it can be, disruptive variety. So the thing about disruption, and we talked about this in the meeting, sometimes in virtual environments, we've often had this problem of having this closed loop system disrupted by technical glitches like latencies and things like that. And those, of course, have been well documented, and they're more nuisances than anything else. So we have nuisance disruption, and of course that can interfere with your ability to stay focused in a virtual environment or your sense of presence. And so that's always been viewed as a problem. But you can also have do this in an experimental way, where you selectively disrupt this system. You selectively open the loop. And sometimes you do this just to see how people respond. Other times you do this maybe as an augmentation. So like I said, sometimes having an open loop or opening that loop at certain times can be beneficial. Or sometimes if you start with an open loop and you close the loop at certain times, it can be beneficial. But my point being in the meeting is that virtual environments allow us to do this. It's really a set of design choices if we can figure out how to do it. And we could call it virtual environment selectivity. And so then that allows us to sort of manage this and see what the range of human perception is and what the adaptive mechanisms are and probe those. And then finally, thinking about this in terms of measurements, we want to have these things be quantitative. And in virtual environments, we can make both the interventions quantitative. So this arrow is an intervention. We can also, and of course, interventions allow us to look at causality. So what's the causality of this closed loop system? If we intervene at a certain point, we can get closer to understanding the reciprocal causality here, the structure of that in a much better way than just saying it's a closed loop system. The other thing is like measuring the effect on perception and in cognition. And so if we can, find times where we can intervene and then look at the cognitive state that follows, we can then have, build graphs and make theories and make predictions about how your perception is disrupted and how this sensory motor loop is disrupted and under what conditions that's adaptive and under what conditions that is disruptive.
I mean, sorry, not totally relevant, but somewhat related. This exoskeleton device to help Parkinson's patients from freezing.
Okay.
Right? That's a breakdown of I forget exactly how the freezing occurs, right? But
Yeah.
but it is related to having this it's a breakdown of that loop. And in interesting ways, and how the exoskeleton frees them from that.
Oh, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and there's of course we have this long-standing sort of project umbrella, which is augmentation, human augmentation, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where that's going as well. Like, if we think about augmentation, we can kind of take that sensory motor loop and say, if we add in some added capacity on the side of the individual, the internal state of an individual, how does that improve their ability to interact with the environment? Are you able to overcome those kind of breaks that occur with these kind of? I'll see you later. Thank you for attending.
Take care, Teresa.
How do we?
Bye.
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 How do we deal with those kind of breaks and those kind of disruptions? So. Okay. So yeah, we got a lot of stuff in the chat. So I guess that's just stuff from so Jesse said so Prashali had to leave, and then Jesse.
Oh, nothing that important.
Okay.
Just, I mean, I don't know what you last saw.
This has a lot of ties to our physical memory discussion also. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think we can. There's other things I wanted to cover, but
okay.
This is really taking me back to that bit about what I was saying at the end of that discussion about how memory is, in my mind, shifting from something saved on a file, like old floppy disk, whatever, hard drive, anything, is much less about that now and much more about like a concert of things happening or not happening. And that's not. I'll leave it at that. But there was. I'm really glad. I think that was a Cognition Futures or Cybernetics reading group former discussion. Yeah, that was a Wiener Cybernetics reading discussion. But that was a really interesting thread that I see tying in here again. Yeah, we can move on to other stuff. There's a few things I want to cover too.
Yeah.
So
and so Teresa had to leave, and then I think there was a link on. That is the Center for Microfluidics Research. So this link here at UPenn is the microfluidics.
Did you pull that from the Brain Organoids channel?
Yeah.
I put that in because Ha was a researcher there, the HUH, and they have a set of YouTube videos from a 2023 meeting, but also like a workshop from 2020 that was again like, you know, I had to stop myself from watching all their videos. like fascinating stuff, but a lot of like physics, physics of the cell, and or of cells, you know, at that length scale.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so why don't we finish up with, we'll go over the Slack. And then next week I'd like to go over, we were talking about these, we have that table of things that we were trying to submit or want to work on. So
Yeah, there's a
next
few
week let's
things I would like
revisit
to
that.
mention about new things before we go, but we can do that later.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll go through the Slack and see where we end up. And so let's start here. So we have in our Slack, we have brain organoids, of course, and this is what we've been talking about earlier. Some of these things. So we have a lot of stuff from over break here. So we kind of maybe broke around the 15th. I don't know. This is where we have a number of readings. So we have researchers map the entire mouse brain, cataloging 5,322 different types of cells. So that's actually interesting because we've had this long-standing topic in DivaWorm about the number of cells in like different organisms, especially like, looking at neural cells versus somatic cell types. And so, this is something people have been working on for years, kind of determining what is a cell type and how many different cell types are in, not cells, but cell types are in like any one organism. So, like in C. elegans, which we know every cell and the identity of every cell, I don't know how many cell types there are there. We could talk, maybe, you could define each cell as a cell type, and that's in that context. But, sometimes it's a categorical problem. But in things like the mouse or the human, we don't actually know because, first of all, we don't have a good census of all the cells. Secondly, their identity changes, so it's not like something that's in C. elegans. This is deterministic, meaning that we know what the cell types are always going to be in the adult, but in mouse and human we don't. So people have tried to like characterize how many cell types there are. This is a good one. This article, we'll have to put a pin in that for the DivaWorm type stuff. Oh, you were going to say something, Morgan?
No, it's interesting. I think there's a link later. Someone editorializing on this in terms of somewhat tongue in cheek in the same way, like, oh, good, I'm glad we've got this catalog. Now we'll be able to settle questions just like we did, once we knew how many neurons were in C. elegans.
Yeah.
like, and just that it's an incredible milestone. Certainly it reflects a huge amount of work, and speaks to the heterogeneity of the overall structure, but it's missing the important part, which is, like how did all that different, how did all that heterogeneity come about?
Right.
What's driving that? What's choosing that at a particular time? It's getting at 11 questions, or
right.
like Levin's getting at how does the collective intelligence of the small group of cells in the beginning of the embryo, somehow get to this endpoint of incredible spatial and cellular heterogeneity.
Yeah. Well, that's really the question, but the answer is, of course, different in like these kind of regulative developmental systems where cells will respond to their neighbors' signaling, and so it's very hard. It's even harder to really kind of get the number of cells down, cell types.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so then we had some things, new statistical physics and living matter. This is a talk. This is a talk series, and this is a talk in the series. So this is
Yeah, that's a
biological
playlist.
physics. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a playlist. Is bitsinbio.org, which I assume is
yeah. So that was more a link. It's an interesting community. Um, that this was more for the Biopunk Society, or it came from like somebody in Biopunk Society Slack, but it was really nice because I'm following their Slack, and then I see someone that used to be in the student chapter of Neurotech X at UC Davis, and as a software engineer, he's now moved up to Seattle, working for some syn bio company. And anyway, so I was super glad that I did follow it. And Bits and Bio is one of those groups that is going to be doing like hosting an event during JPM Health this coming week.
Okay. Yeah.
So anyway, hoping to meet more computational biologists and learn more about the kind of the software and education that people use for that.
Yeah, it's very good to keep in touch on the open source front and see what people are doing in the community. Like, it's obviously an open source focus. So, yeah. So then we have some events. This NSF/NIH workshop on foundational AI techniques in biology. This is from Nico McCarty, who's posts a lot of biology content.
That was more just a pretty picture, or pretty.
So this is a 3D structural model of entire bacterial cell. So yeah, there's a number of groups working on like bacterial cells and yeast cells in terms of simulating the whole cell. So this is one way to break it down at the level of the cell and get the 3D shape of the cell and model very hyper realistically every component. But you can model different 3D sort of structures of the cell and really get a lot of detail. You can take a lot of the bioinformatics information and attach it to the model. So this is something we do not do in DivaWorm really, but this is something that people have worked on, and this is a nice example of that.
And this work and the previous work on the statistical, mechanics and new physics for living systems, that's all trying to get some perspective to do this kind of bottom up modeling of organoids.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah. So some people think that the ideal model would be to model the cell and have the hyper-realistic model of the cell, and then the cells interacting and then building up from there. So there are different ways you can do biological modeling. You don't have to. I don't think you necessarily need a hyper-realistic model of the cell, but that it's very useful for a lot of things. And so,
I mean, in the James Glazer kind of perspective, the question at each of these, for these multi-scale models, the question is always, what details do I need to include?
Right.
To then be able to move up a scale, right? And yeah, but really interesting to know, what is the like the CEMB, what is the biophysics at the subcellular scale?
Yeah. And this is, the kind of, well, I don't know if I would call it a minimal approach, but you do have minimal approaches where you take the least amount of information you need to really get a decent answer. And depending on the answer you want, now a whole cell might give you a good answer, but it's not the least amount of information you need. So sometimes that's good, and sometimes a lot of detail is good, depending on the question you're asking.
For sure, and we're covering a bit of this in these in the fly model discussions that I'm having with Paris group. There's now these whole connectome models for Drosophila, right? uh, uh, but then there's two kind of competing groups, right? One is this Rican Japanese group that did a neuron model where they're kind of including as much of the neural geometry, receptor types, everything for the reaction diffusion equations. And then the Princeton kind of Berkeley group that almost completely abstract that down to these point models, and so the Japanese models running on a supercomputer
Yeah.
for many hours, right? And this guy at Berkeley lab is running it on his laptop in like 10 minutes. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's really interesting to see what he's doing with so one's using like neuron but like at scale using message passing, the other's like a Brian 2 kind of doable on your laptop model.
Yeah.
and yet both were looking at, well, probably for some reasons we can understand, but both end up saying things about the olfactory system in Drosophila, with good results, and that says a lot about what you can do with multi-scale models.
Yeah, and I think you can't discount the idea of like using less computer power, because if you want to make these models portable and accessible to people, you can't rely on like massive amounts of computational power, and that holds true for like a lot of the machine learning models too.
Yeah, and not for right now, but I want to say 2024. I want to talk more about neuromorphic computing and how neuromorphic computing. I mean, this should be obvious in the beginning, but it wasn't obvious to me how we can really leverage our computational neuroscience to do neuromorphic computing.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's keep going here on this. There's a lot of stuff here. I might not even go over a lot of these. I think that there's things on RNA-seq analysis, organelle profiling. So a lot of these we're looking at the constituent proteins and mRNA and things like that, and getting.
I can say a few things like this. Robert Fremo, the Rett. Sorry, scroll down.
Oh.
Yeah.
That one, Rett syndrome.
Yeah, the Rett syndrome. Yeah, that was the talk so he's like a veteran of neurological drug discovery, and that was where he says brain organoids, but he very much explicitly differentiates his work from Alison Motri's, but he's down in San Diego, and was saying a lot about the difficulties. He's like, he started to talk with like 9 out of 10, drugs that we get to, I don't know, phase 2 or something like that, like fail. And he's like, wait, no, make that 10 out of 10. So a lot to break down in that talk. Really interesting.
Yeah. So there's that. We have some other Stanford, Seraph and Chem H.
Yeah, that was so that seems to be, if I that seems to be like Stanford's kind of brain engineers group, in the sense that like across departments, because you've got everybody from the people working on kind of material science and their expertise as it relates to like scaffolds and the importance of scaffolds in tissue engineering, as well as the growth factors, as well as cellular control mechanisms, etc. Right?
Yeah.
And well, again, so much of this I think one of the, again, like I think I put a link to this just because, again, as Levin points out, cancer is a breakdown of multicellularity.
Yeah.
And so, well, two things. One, as always, cancer researchers, cancer doctors are the kind of the most technically sophisticated when it comes to cellular and molecular mechanisms, and so it's really really good to learn from them in terms of what's state of the art, as well as the fact that the things that relate to metastasis are very very interesting from this kind of Levin multicellularity, lack of multicellularity perspective.
Yeah. And so we have let's see, we have a new 3D co-culture model to study the effect of proton therapy on aggressive brain cancers. This is 3D cell culture.
Yeah, it relates to the scaffolds again.
Yeah. This is the Brain Image Library, a community-contributed microscopy resource for neuroscientists. That's
there's a couple of things that I forget if that's Chang Zuckerberg BioHub related, but definitely some great software projects and data releases from both of them, or from Brain Initiative as well as CZI, that are really really interesting.
Yeah. This one, your autism genes converge on microtubule biology and RNA binding proteins during excitatory neurogenesis. So this is actually sort of computational developmental neuropsychiatry, or whatever you want to call it. This is where we're looking at autism genes and sort of their phenotypic effects, and then during neurogenesis, so mostly during development. And this is kind of characterizing with next gen sequencing, CropSeq, I guess. I don't know what these acronyms are actually. CropSeq, I'm not sure, but so this is just kind of like doing a profile of autism and saying what we can expect during neurogenesis.
Yeah, and just as it relates to trying to stay abreast of all the acronyms.
Yeah.
I've got, again, it's been great to be a part of a computational biology community, and I've got links. I don't know if I've put them here, but Caltech has a course on computational biology, as does MIT. But the Caltech professor who runs that lab has a really nice summary of these tools that he gave at Cold Spring Harbor, and what was particularly interesting was he was talking about real problems with these, and we shouldn't get lost, or we shouldn't lose the fact that others have pointed this out, that there's kind of a reproducibility problem in computational biology. And he's talking about certain, especially when people are using like UMAP and things like that. He's like, just because UMAP gives you blobs, you're not done.
Yeah.
It's going to give you blobs. Anyway, he has a really nice talk that's an intro. He also just released all his course materials for his comp bio class.
Okay.
And anyway, it worth going through.
Yeah, we did talk about UMAP once in the EvoWorm group. I did a presentation on UMAP and kind of how what it means from like a multidimensionality reduction perspective on biological data. And suffice it to say, it does produce a lot of pretty pictures, but there's this chronic problem of interpreting what that means exactly, and so that's a problem. But that's also a science question. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the channel that's really interesting. Yeah, you can keep scrolling through.
Yeah, that's the Center for Engineering Mechanobiology. That's the name, the CEMB.
Okay.
It's really good stuff. And Teresa actually is the one who put me onto HU's work, the HUH,
Okay.
and the microfluidics that they're doing. But it's microfluidics for this, organ on a chip kind of technology.
Oh, right. Yeah. So yeah, this is the organ on a chip, tissue chips. This is like just where they have like the chip, where they have the cell culture, but you can do, regulate all the chemistry there and actually do the recording of the activity.
And the Columbia Tissue Talks, which is a weekly seminar that's online, and you can join. They more so, well, actually Tarasky too, but I'd say a lot of more groups focus on these organ on a chips than say necessarily growing organoids, and I think that neurological drug discovery talk showed you why.
Right.
That it's only if you really want to do brain science that you need to grow this tissue, and people who are say focused on growing tumors and things like that, like they might want to just stick with a much more controllable prep.
Right. Yeah. Because it's very hard to really kind of make a replicable set of organoids.
But it definitely relates to that as well.
Yeah.
that again, like I've got to find that Madeline Lancaster talk where it's just like she's the one saying it.
Right. Well, yeah, I know.
Yeah. I mean, but she's like, yeah. We've got multiple organoid groups, and none of us can replicate each other's work.
Right. So I think we'll go maybe to the psychiatrist.
Can you just finish with that one Earl Miller paper?
This one here.
It was the one that spoke the most to, I think, Jesse's question.
Yeah.
And I don't, yeah. So this is really interesting in the sense that I think it gets at to some degree why Levin's work is more fundamental. It gets at why that is. Like he seems to be showing that you need to understand Levin's stuff to understand brain development.
Right.
But that the electrical activity that when we're talking about electrophysiology, we're talking about an electrical network of a particular cell type in a much larger framework, a much larger structure.
Yeah.
That seems to be bioelectrically organized as well. And this was the first, so hat tip to Earl Miller for showing me this paper in a sense of address, getting at exactly why, how Levin's work is different than say Bradley Wojtek's and Sri Nagarajan's, who are kind of built on top of brain organoid.
Right. Yeah, I think this is a good if you're talking about bioelectricity, but then talking about it in a network, and especially a network where you have this embryo where you have an emerging neural network, you have an emerging set of cells, and they're differentiating, but they're all kind of bioelectric. And then the question is why do we have a central nervous system, and obviously there's a divergence between like the bioelectricity of stem cells or precursor cells, and then that more specialized neuronal network of the brain, which we'll see in the frog brain, but we'll also see in other somatic cells in the frog. But of course, the electrical activity is much different. So we start to get like, action potentials, and that's a consequence of different ion channels that are being expressed in the neurons but not in other cells. And so this work shows the power of using a minimal in silico approach. So they're not modeling the cells in hyper detail, they're just kind of doing a minimal model of the cells and then simulating it on a computer to drastically reduce the parameter space in vivo, making hard biological questions tractable. And so this result provides an insight into the collective decision-making process of cells and interpreting bioelectric patterns that guide large-scale morphogenesis, and also tools for synthetic bioengineering. So that's a good paper. And Jesse, of course, that's of interest to you, and Amanda as well. We talked about the revisiting 11 paper in cybernetics, and we should bring some of this work into play as well, because that's going to sort of be the Rosetta Stone for some of the things that 11 talks about. So I think we're going to not do the computational psychiatry channel. Like, we're not going to go through the readings that have kind of accumulated over the break this week. We'll maybe come back to this next week, but I just wanted to point out that there are also some content in here that I think will be interesting to people. Oh, this article here, the last article here, Morgan posted.
That's a book review of Mind Fixers.
Oh, okay, that's good. That's the one.
Not Mind Hunters.
Okay, so that was the one that Jesse had mentioned, or that would be of interest to Jesse's work with Jen on, and so that's so. Jesse, I don't know if you wanted to make. So all right, so you have some things in the chat here to mention before meeting close, or at least
I just wanted to mention that one because I don't know if you want to share your screen. I can.
Oh yeah, I can do it.
It's just relevant because it happens to be this really interesting mixture of Tenenbaum, Levin, Melanie Mitchell. Like Adam posted on his thing saying "Avengers Assemble" again or something like that. It's very Adam Safran role models, but like it's just an impressive mixture of things. I think we should try to submit something to it. We did the thing last year with them.
Yeah.
I don't really know exactly how I want to spin it yet, but like I feel like we gotta try something for this. So we've got just to put it on the map for like a month or so from now.
Oh, this would be very good at like pulling together some of the stuff we've been talking about, cognition futures and cybernetics. So this is the special issue is world models, AGI, and the hard problem of life-mind continuity. I don't know what qualifies in that outline, but it's a unified understanding of natural and artificial intelligence. Yeah. So it looks like we need to have an abstract by the 1st of March and a paper submission by June 1. So that means that we'd have to like come up with an abstract by March 1st, but really kind of an outline of the paper by March 1st, because we know we need to have a paper in hand by sometime. And they play with those deadlines, but at the beginning, early summer. So this is where, they kind of talk about the power of AI. World modeling is sort of this holy grail of, how does an artificial intelligence system sort of model its world so it can generalize or it can learn to learn. And then, let's see, in these ways, it seems that one of the most important questions we will ever ask and hopefully answer is what kinds of world modeling capacities are sufficient for realizing what range of functional properties in which variety of systems under which circumstances. So this world modeling idea, people have done things with this. David Ha and Schmidt-Huber published a paper really interesting paper on world models, where they kind of tested some world models in a video game, a driving simulation, and the artificial intelligence had to model the world that it was working in, and it was able to build like a model of the racetrack, and so that's kind of the approach that people have taken. But the idea of world modeling is really modeling the world that you're going to encounter. So does the AI have that model?
Bradley, do you think of that as like good regulator theorem kind of stuff, in the sense that, like, to be able to handle the problem, you need to
for the states.
Yeah.
You need to.
I think, I think, well, the good regulator theorem just basically states that you have good, good what requires good regulation. So you need to have a model of the system. We've talked about this, and I actually talk about it in some of the talks that I put up over the break, where you have this, you have to be able to adequately model all the things you'll encounter, whether that's state-wise or like phenomenologically. What is it that you're encountering? If you see something, do you know what it is, and are you able to generalize it? Because if you can't, then if I see something I've not encountered before, I just interpret it wildly, and you could say it's like a hallucination in a large language model, which just makes like nonsensical decisions.
Yeah. Well, it'd be interesting, because I mean, I'm seeing more, like I think I showed you this links to like an interesting imaging meeting that they finally posted the videos on, and it was. I thought it was interesting because the way they were using like world model and foundation model, and I was like, ooh, like what are the definitions of these stuff?
Yeah, I think that's what they're trying to do in this call, and like try to say like not just the kinds of world model, but what are world models in your sort of from your perspective.
Okay. Okay. Good. Okay.
So it's just, I think, really, and this is something that I think would be good for us, is to say, what is a good definition of world model, like with respect to maybe embodied systems or, that sort of thing. And then on top of that is sort of how that relates to the good regulator theorem. So we, are interested in that. We have the good regulator theorem. And the good regulator theorem itself is a set of definitions which are kind of like, good regulation when you see it. And that's not a very satisfying answer, because because you don't know what that means in every context. So if we could like phrase this in terms of, okay, what is good regulation? What does that regulator look like? It's probably a world model, because obviously it needs to be a model. It needs to model things. It needs to model the world adequately. So those two things are connected. And then what is the definition from that of a world model, and what does that look like? So, I mean, that would be my answer to this. And I don't know how we want to structure it, but we should definitely look at this in more detail.
I think, like, and you don't have to share your screen again, but like just the list: Adam Safar, Melanie Mitchell, Nick Hay, Michael Levin, Sam Gershman, Josh Tadell, David Crocker, Arena Ryers, Adil Razi, Zahara Shishkavape, I said very badly, Kevin Schmidt, David Hoff, Victoria Klimaj, Dalton, I'm not even going to try to say his last name, but just like it's just a cool list of folks that I'm interested in. So, fanboy moment aside, I think there's actually quite a few things we could do about it. I don't really want to talk about it. We're quite late now, but I feel like we could have a few things. Like I think the cybernetics stuff and maybe the cybernetics reading group really tackle a lot there, and maybe even have a few potential submissions. I think it'd be a lot of fun things to talk about for this. So that's why I wanted to mention it before, just to get it on the brains. So we talk about it more next week.
Yeah.
I'd also love to invite Logan and ask Logan to talk about things that are more orthogonal and less like specifically kind of therapeutic.
Right.
Like I try to pull out the gems that he's always dropping in terms of things that seem to relate to like directed evolution and things like that. But definitely I want more orthogonal.
Even more orthogonal.
Love to invite him.
And I mean, like I think Logan would do it. I think it would be a matter of like what of the amazing things that he's in and we talk about do we want to try to focus on. knowing it will change, but like that would be a fun thing to maybe aim for later on. So yeah, real cool stuff here.
Yeah. All right. I think that's all for this week. Thank you for your contributions and your attention, and a lot to kind of get at in the new year. So next week we'll talk about some of our deliverables for the next year, and have a good week. Thank you.
Yeah, take care.
Take care.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.